Okay, we're going to look at the ecosystem interaction, the review. We're going to start with the raccoon story. That is basically goes into detail about the size of the raccoon, everything about it, their intelligence, their ability to get into things, catch fish. Talks about how they were brought over to Europe as pets. They're found in most places across Europe now, but they're pretty much indigenous to the United States. And goes into some detail about how humans hunt raccoons in traffic accidents and all the sort. Two questions that follow that are what are ways that a raccoon interacts with its environment in order to survive? Well, the question on the test is going to give you three ways that it does, but ask you for the exception to the rule. And the exception, well, the three ways that it does, it looks for food in trash cans, obviously. Catching a fish from a river, raccoons are able to do that. Using rocks as shelter during a snowstorm. The only exception on there is the being hunted for sport by animals, because that's obviously not a way a raccoon's going to survive. The second question is what are ways humans have affected them? Well, one, they brought them to Europe. Two, they hunted them. Three, they built roads. So with the traffic accidents, the one that, and it's kind of like along the same format as question number one is going to be, which one of these are ways except for this one, which is move them to the mountains. Raccoons kind of brought that on themselves. The question with what that says plants with this kind of seed rely on what for reproduction? They rely on wind for reproduction. It's kind of like the dandelion seeds. The fourth question, two behavioral adaptations used by birds and mammals living in colder climates. If you remember from the video that we watched the other day, the caribou that migrated, migration is one of those. The polar bear hibernating, those are two ways that they are able to survive in colder climates. The forest fires question, it says forest fires destroy habitats, force many animals to find new homes. What characteristics would help them survive after a forest fire? Having a broad diet, because if the grasses and native animals and stuff like that get burned, I mean, you're going to have to be able to find something else to eat. So having a broad diet is what we're looking for on that one. Prairie dogs. Prairie dogs live on our West Texas high plains. Then it goes into detail about what animals depend on a prairie dog. With a severe drought, what will happen to the ecosystem if the native grasses die? Well, prairie dogs may die in some areas, and the predators who feed on them are either going to move on or die as well. Name the gases that are being recycled, quote unquote, recycled in the diagram, and explain how each is recycled. Quite simply, what? Oxygen, carbon dioxide, the human giving off carbon dioxide for the plants to use to go through the process of photosynthesis. Plants are going to give off oxygen that the human's going to take in to survive and breathe as well. The next question follows along the same diagram and along the same lines as well. Explain how the diagram above shows how people and plants help each other. Same thing as I said before. But with this one, you're going to have to be able to write it out, right? And what I'm looking for is that like this. The person exhales carbon dioxide. The plant uses this in photosynthesis. The plant produces oxygen. The person uses. So be able to write it out as well as be able to find it in an A, B, C, or D choice. Next question goes into detail about a class's project. Then it says, explain how the algae and the shrimp remained alive. Well, really, that's kind of like three questions in a row that are about the same. So what I'm looking for on that one is that the shrimp eat the algae, use oxygen, produce carbon dioxide that the algae uses to produce food and oxygen. So along the same lines as the diagram below. The nitrogen cycle above. Looking at that one, you have organisms die all the time. The decomposers turn them into nitrogen and nutrients for the soil, for the plants to grow. Plants grow, consumers eat the plants, they die, and et cetera, et cetera. What gas do plants take in to produce sugars through photosynthesis? Right? They take in carbon dioxide. What gas do trees give off that's essential to mammals? Oxygen. Goes into details about how a community is going to start trying to improve the atmosphere by planting lots of trees. So if planting large numbers of trees results in obviously an increase in oxygen production. Next one, perfect weather conditions lead to an increase in the number of deer, very much like Central Texas. What impact is this going to have on the ecosystem? You have more deer, the amount of plants, right, is going to actually decrease due to overgrazing, just like we looked at with the bison and the grass example from yesterday, the effects of change. So overgrazing is what we're looking for on that one. Which of these is most likely to harm an ecosystem? When you look at those, it's going to say going to like planting wildflowers, which that helps an ecosystem. Overwatering a garden doesn't really harm an ecosystem. And what we're looking for is cutting down trees to build a shopping mall is going to be the one to key in on that one. And I'm not sure if that one on your review actually had 4 choices or not, but go with along the lines of the cutting down the trees. Some areas of Texas suburbs are growing, just like in Sonterra. These manufacturers are now making changes to the amount of waste products that are sent into the air. Why is it important? Think about it. You don't want to be living next to a manufacturer that sends off carbon monoxide and everything into the air. Your air quality would go down. So for humans and for animals, that's important. Coyotes roam over large areas of land in Texas. What effect would building a mall, or I could say what effect would building Sonterra and all the houses over there have on their territory? Well, it's obviously going to decrease, right, the size of the coyote's habitat. So take some of that away. The bar graph was really rough to read on your review, but it's easier to read here on the PowerPoint slide. And it just shows how the organisms, right, were different populations over how they changed in a 10-year span. So if you look at it, the cows increased, antelopes and the rattlesnakes stayed the same, but the grass population, the mesquite tree population, and the prairie dog population all went down. So that's what resulted in the increase of cows. In this food diagram, which organism eats only producers? Mice. Right? The mouse is the only one that eats the producers in that food web, which might say is a pretty simple food web. What is one way that energy flows to the hawk in this food web? Well, you could go from anything. You go from grass to insects to the frog to the hawk. You can go from plants to the insects to the lizard to the hawk in any number of ways. Just as long as you understand what the arrows mean, which we'll talk about on a question in a second. What is the role of plankton? Plankton are kind of like producers. They produce their own food with light. So the answer you're looking for on that one is producers. For this one, where does the energy from this food chain come from? We looked at a video the other day and we've talked about it. We've built food chains in class. The yellow portion, the sun. The sun drives the engine for everything in an energy food web. What do the arrows represent? We talked about this one yesterday as well. That is, it represents the energy moving from one living thing to the next. So being transferred, which is the 10% energy being transferred from one to the next. Illustrate the direction of energy flow through the food web. Again, if you understand the arrows, what they're pointing to. So for example, if you look down there, the mouse, right? The mouse is actually getting energy from the grasshopper. So if you follow the arrow is pointing in a direction of the energy flow. So it's not to say the mouse gets eaten by the grasshopper because it's down there at the bottom. They can interchange those things in a number of ways, just like I was showing you guys yesterday. Which of the living things on the food web could be decomposed if they died without being a food source? Every single one of those could be decomposed if they died without being a food source. Which of the following animals is best adapted to survive a long snow-covered winter? It's going to be your ground squirrel that hibernates. You have a number of different characteristics of an Australian mammal. Where is the animal described in this description most likely to spend most of its life? Look at number 6. It says webbed feet. Number 1, it says 2 layers of waterproof fur. It's going to spend most of its time in the water. And I think it's Perry the platypus too. Which wing type is not suited for flying? Your dolphin. Although they fly at SeaWorld, they're not going to be flying out in the wild. And then this one goes into details about a new zoo opening. It advertises, it allows animals to live in an ecosystem just like their natural homes. Understand that there's living elements and be able to identify those like grasses and trees and other animals that are there in that environment. And then understand that there's non living or abiotic parts to an ecosystem, just like rocks and trees and stuff like that. Right? Also, did the zoo follow its advertisement of providing ecosystems? Probably not. Nothing's going to really be in a comparison to the zoo's to its natural environment. And that ends that. Good luck on the test tomorrow, and go back, pause, rewind, look at some of the other questions if you need to.